And so I use the analogy of a traffic light. And I was making mention of that when they're on the cliff, but when the persons come to me, they're very much in red light. And so my job is to help them come to yellow. And so the yellow is them recognizing and realizing how their body actually moves. And so where they grip and where they hold and where they might be going past really the movement that they should. And they start to realize all these other things and these nuances. And it's something they haven't typically paid attention to, which is not uncommon, because where the pain is not normally the problem. Where the pain is an expression of the problem, and the actual problem lies under our level of awareness.
This is the Anthropology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Anthropology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As a naturopathic doctor and anthropologist, I optimize the health and performance of badass women working to change the world as entrepreneurs and go-getters. You know, people exactly like you. Your business, body, balance, and inner badass, these are the themes we are exploring. So sometimes when we get in the zone where we think we are this badass, where we are working on being quote unquote successful, we resort to the technique that for most of us got us here, which is the capacity to put our head down and actually do the work. And while that is extremely important, our ability to block things out, manage our stress, push through, dig deep, those things are excellent at getting us to this point in our career. But I guarantee you, no one can take it to the next level by continuing with that technique. Everyone reaches a point in their career or in their life where they truly need to listen to their body. Your body is the one that's going to tell you it's time to level up. And by leveling up, what I mean is this. I mean that there is an opportunity for you to achieve with a whole new level of elegance and simplicity. So this idea of being able to push really, really hard, that's how we reach the top of our game in the lowest possible rung of achievement. But what should happen with our careers, and we hear this alluded to, it's on the quotes of journals, we hear it in podcasts, we see it occasionally in life, is people will say it should get easier as you go. And if that has not been your experience to date, if you're starting to feel some of that fatigue, even if it's just a matter of being honest with yourself, then I want you to listen up, because there's an opportunity for all of us to make it a little bit easier while still achieving more. And my guest today talks about this in strides. Susi Hately has a background not only as a high achiever, but as a kinesiologist and as a yoga therapist. Susi works with high achieving individuals to teach them how to tap into, listen to the body, and then be able to expand in terms of their capacity past a level they ever thought possible. The secret to ease is actually inside your body. It exists inside your own physiology. You are getting the feedback on a daily basis. I truly am excited to introduce you to Susi and her work, because it is going to be game-changing for you. We're going to talk about burnout, we're going to talk about leveling up, and we're going to give you an entirely new perspective on how to get there. Now, Susi, she really needs no introduction. She's tremendously accomplished. She has written over 10 best-selling books or created programs. She's got a massive following on Instagram. The woman is brilliant at what she does, and she walks her own talk. She is building a life on her terms. She has so much wisdom to share with you. It is my pleasure to introduce you to my guest today, Susi Hately. Susi Hately, welcome to the Anthropology Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we have a lot to jump into today, and we were just chatting a little bit before we got in about toddlers and balancing business, and really like what I was hearing on my side was like, oh my gosh, you're building your ideal life. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about yoga. We're gonna talk about the business of yoga and the wellness industry. We are gonna talk about how to leverage all of these different pieces and balance to be able to be a stronger entrepreneur and impactor in the world. But before we do, can you give all of our listeners a little bit of a background on you and how you ended up here today?
Well, I'm one of these people who I got here a little bit by mistake. I think it was when I look back, it's one of those classic scenarios when I look back and I can see all the dots being connected. But I mean, I graduated from university with a degree in kinesiology, and I had been working in my summers at the hospital in Vancouver, and I was toying with, do I go to OT or medicine or PT or what do I do? And then I found myself working at a PT clinic with chronic pain, or with people with chronic pain. And I'd gotten into yoga at the same time. And when I combined the yoga with the exercise therapy we were doing, people started to get better really quite quickly. And so I was super excited being a new grad and being out in the working world. And then I couldn't find any way to actually apply it other than in a very confined kind of clinic setting. And so I put it off to the side, and I worked in other parts of the kind of the rehab industry with insurance and stuff, but I kept kind of doing yoga. And then I kept just meeting people who needed help, who were in pain, and it just grew from there bit by bit by bit. And so and then when I started to do my teacher training, people found out about my kinesiology background, and studios asked me to do anatomy teaching. And then I wrote a book, and it was one of these things that just was one thing after the other. And then it landed in a place where I now run an accredited certification yoga therapy training program where I teach yoga teachers and physiotherapists and other health workers to integrate, or how to integrate therapeutic yoga into their practices. And then I run a really bustling one-to-one client program for people who are burnt out, or they might not think they're burnt out. Actually, they just have pain. And then they begin to realize that they're way more tired than they thought. And I help them rechannel their energy and get them back on track. So it's one of those happenstance by mistake, but when you look back on it, you're like, oh yeah, I can so see the pathway. But really, really fun journey so far.
That's amazing. You said something there that I actually just want to pull out. I have a few things, but I want to actually start with it. And you talked about burnout and pain in the same sentence. Can you talk about the pain of burnout? Because what I see in my practice is people have adrenal fatigue or burnout, whatever label we want to put on it. It's the same cluster of physiological challenges, and we all kind of get there the same way. But people often don't recognize it in and of themselves. And I find pain is one of these things our brain just can compartmentalize. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit, because I think there's a lot of people walking around, I'm going to say in midlife, with midlife pain, which is actually a symptom of burnout.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot there. I think what I'll start with is before burnout was a thing, there were a lot of people who were tired, and it was just something that you are when you're a parent and you've got kids and you've got life. It's John Kabat-Zinn's title of the book, Full Catastrophe Living. It's just what it is. Everybody is like that. So it is what it is. And people have been tired for so long, they actually have no idea what rested actually is anymore. So I think there's an element of that's what it is. So that's just the way it is. I heard the other week someone asking a woman what she was going to dress up as for Halloween. And she said, a harried woman who has no time. So basically saying she was just going to dress in what she normally wears. Right. So, so we can laugh about it. And when I overheard the conversation, she was laughing about it, but there was this reality of like, that's just the way life is. So I think there's an element of that. The other piece of it too, is a lot of the people that I see in my private practice are people who are very driven and very ambitious, and they're wondering why on earth they can't keep doing what they've been doing. And they've been referred to me either from a client or a sleep doctor or a fitness person who say to them, I can't work with you yet. Like you're too depleted. So you need to go see Susie. And they're a bit flummoxed because they've typically had a number of different things happen in their life, and they just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and carried on and found a way around and through, and they've just done a fabulous job at pushing aside the symptoms and putting their head down and going. And now it's not working, and they're a little flummoxed by that. And so they they even look at the word stress typically as being kind of like
for other people.
Yes, that's a nice way of saying it. And they've always just been at not maybe at the top of their class, like from a marks perspective. They've been at the top of the game, right? And so burnout, they're just like burnout. What do you mean I'm burnt out? Like they don't come because there's burnout. They come because it's like, I still want to keep doing what I'm doing. And why can't I do it? And oh, by the way, I've got this pain. So that's really, I find that part really interesting. So a lot of people will, the limitations that they're feeling in their bodies and the symptoms in their bodies, they don't see the relationship between the two. They just see themselves not being able to live at the high level of gain that they're used to living at.
And there's almost, I get a sense from these patients, I say patients, they're also friends, they're sometimes me, that exactly kind of what we were talking about, this stress thing is for other people, and this burnout thing is for other people. It is a sign of weakness. And I don't necessarily view it that way. I feel like burnout is one of those things that is how your body keeps you actually in check. And I also view it as an opportunity to reorient around balance. And I mean balance in like the most boss move ever. Because if you're like, what is the point of all this? What's the point of pounding? What's the point of being number one? What's the point of being on the leaderboard of all those things if you're not hanging out with your kids or your partner or exploring the world or smelling the roses? And like, none of those experiences are for the weak. Like, those are the experiences you want to have, living. So I really try to, and I'm sure you do something similar with my patients. I'm like, we need to reorient the symptoms of burnout and really place an element of gratitude on your body, which is telling you, hey, wait a second, like, let's make sure that we are balancing out the priorities here. Because there's been a lot of pounding and pushing lately, and you're good at that already.
Yes. And I think about a statement that one of my clients sent to me a short time ago. And it was this idea of listening to his body was weak because all of his success had been about pushing aside the symptoms. And so I was asking him to actually listen to his body. And it was very befuddling to him. Now, he was also the fellow who was told, like I have got I would say 50% of my clientele are told, if you don't do something, you're going to get into big trouble. So you can quit your job, or the job will get you. And so he's looking at me saying, well, should I just quit my job? And what I said to him is, you could go rest up. And then because what's in your DNA is to build amazing businesses, you will feel good, and then you're going to just happen upon one because that's just your energy. And then you're going to fall right back into the same trap because you haven't changed any of the behavior. Mm-hmm. So you could actually change the behavior that has led to this scenario and then stay where you are, loving what you're doing, and do it way more effectively. Or you can leave and rest and not change anything and then just be right back in the same position. So I find that when I share it that way, and when I say to people too, I say, a lot of them feel like they've been told that they have to change and that there's something broken in them. And what I like to say is, like the you that is you, and I can say this because I'm coming from this yoga place, this yoga meditation place of, the you that is you is the same you as the first day you were born. So that has been consistent all of your life. That is not going to change. What's going to shift is how that you is expressed. And you can actually express that in a way that's way more productive, that's way more energy efficient, and in fact will leverage you to being able to produce even more than you could ever imagine. And when I frame it that way, there's there's a little bit of their competitive edge that pokes up, and it's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, because it's like how you're working right now is really kind of ineffective. And I say it like that because I don't want to be like too in their face, but I want them to know that yes, you're like this Ferrari. And the Ferrari, I'm going to get really, my analogy is going to go really sideways in a moment.
I am still following you really for the record.
But it's like, you're like a Ferrari that has a transmission that's busted up. And so you're not even getting anywhere near what you could out of this vehicle. And it's not that you're broken, even though I just said busted up. It's just, you're just not getting what you could out of this. And so you just need to shift up some of how you're doing something. And you're gonna take off. And invariably what they'll say is something like, but why is everybody else doing fine? Like everyone else can drink and everyone else can eat crappy food and everyone else can stay out late and they can run their marathons and blah, blah, blah. They're fine. And I say to them, are you sure? Like, take a look. Like really take a look and take a look. Like, really, they might be hiding it really well, but just take a look. And then after a little bit of time, as they're getting more aware of how they're moving and just overall how they are, then they come back and they say, okay, you're right. People are pretty sick. I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of people who are not well. There are a lot of people who are run ragged. And because you weren't aware of it, you were just in it. Now you can, now you can see it. And so this is actually giving you an advantage of like, this is kind of your little, like depending on who the person is, they'll say it's like your little secret weapon of your next layer of leadership and success. If you can get this, like, I mean, this is where the juice is. This is where your juice really is at of what you really can contribute.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I talk about this concept of the elegance of achievement. And at first, like you can, when you're just strong, doesn't matter, academically, physically, you can kind of put your head down and plow through and go, whoa, I've achieved results. But that's only for like the bottom of the triangle. And as you move up, it requires a heightened degree of elegance to really master that next stage. And so sometimes I think people feel like they're top of their game, but they're really just top of the game of the bottom rung. And if they step out and go into the next classroom or the next cohort, it is not about brute force anymore. This is where there's an elegance to achievement as you move up this triangle. And I'm hearing you say the same thing. And your body usually tells you when it's time to leave your level and move to the next one. It's usually not your brain, because our brain is there to protect us. Our brain gets all the rewards of being, quote unquote successful. But your body's like, whoa, no, we're ready. We're ready for that next level. And you usually know it because you're tired. You're tired in that room. So I love the way you're describing this. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying there, because it reminds me of rock climbers and how women tend not to be as strong as men. And so men can brute force their way up a rock side. Women can't. And so women learn finesse very, very, very quickly. So the good female climbers are really good, like really good. And then men at some point have to realize they need to learn finesse if they want to get beyond. So it's the same idea. The other piece, when you said the elegance of achievement, what came to mind was, and sometimes before elegance is awkward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is, it is a very good point. So I want to slip back to this pain thing, because I know we're both on the same page. What literally is happening in people's bodies physically from a pain perspective when they're starting to feel burnt out? Like, where do you see this pain?
Oh, well, I mean, anywhere. Like, I mean, anywhere. I've had people who, the burnout has arisen out of concussions, or I've got a client right now who has concussion-like symptoms, but hasn't had a concussion. Someone who's got this sort of consistent back pain, knee pain, neuroma. Other people who it's shoulder, neck. It's where, and I think from an orthopedic perspective, it's almost as if the how they're carrying their body and how they're bracing and gripping against just how they're living.
I was going to say life.
Then it just becomes the pattern. It becomes the compensation. It becomes the behavior. And then that's just the way we are. And so when people start to move better, so a lot of the work I do has to do with movement because of my background as a kinesiologist. It starts off as movement, and I like it from that perspective because the body is a very grounded place to work. It's your body moves or it doesn't move. You breathe or you don't breathe, and so you can see movement patterns pretty easily. And I find that how people move demonstrates a lot about their personality. So I'll often see people like pushing really hard to get a stretch, or gripping and moving, and I'll ask them to only move as far as they don't grip, or they don't really just shove themselves into something, and it's kind of foreign for them initially, and to really feel into how their body's meant to be moving as opposed to this kind of digging in and making something happen. And they'll be very surprised at how gentle and slow initially some of what it is that I do with them, and yet they're getting the results, and they're getting flummoxed because they're thinking, how is this that I feel so loose and I feel so in flow and I feel so spacious and we're not doing anything? And I smile and I say, isn't that interesting? This is what effortless effort is, right? Like, think about how much energy you've been putting into your movement, and do you notice any other correlation? And then I leave it to them to start to put together those pieces, because invariably it will bubble over when they're realizing, oh my gosh, when I'm driving my car, my shoulders are at my ears. When I'm working in front of my computer, my eyes are squinting. And then they start to piece it together, and then they get to downregulate in a lot of areas pretty quickly, and then change happens pretty fast when they can connect those dots.
They say that you are the product of the 5 people with whom you spend the most time. Imagine you could spend time with hundreds of fellow entrepreneurs and go-getters looking to uplevel their business, body, and mindset. The Anthropology Collective does not belong to us. It belongs to you. Come hang out with us on Facebook and let us collectively inspire, support, and cheerlead you towards your vision for contribution, your commitment towards better health, and your journey of mindset mastery. We are in this together. We are entrepreneurs by birth, by choice, and by mission. We are the Anthropology Collective. Search for us on Facebook and come join your tribe. Yeah, I love this. And it reminded me of a story. I shared this on IGTV last week, but you're saying effortless effort reminded me of it. And I just want to throw it out there because it's so relevant to this conversation. So I was in San Diego last week, and I was walking down to the beach every day. And I found this route, and it's this beautiful paved path, like long, like I'm going to call it a mountain because it was a pretty long road. And then I was in the top quarter, and this man was running up the road. And I was like, oh, good for him. Like, he is running sprints up the side of a mountain. And my first thought was, when I get to the bottom, I'm going to do this twice before I get to enjoy the beach. And that was literally the dialogue. It was before I get to enjoy the beach, like as if I don't deserve the beach without doing like 2 30-minute sprints up a mountain first. And I caught myself, and I really resisted it. And I was like, no, like you get to enjoy the beach and the beautiful, easy path down to it just because. And so I sat on there and I had this really great meditation, and I realized how often something is placed in front of me, and I take what is supposed to be this lovely experience and an easy experience, and I just turn it into a hard thing for no reason whatsoever. And I finished this meditation, and then I turned around, and there was this beautiful path back up the hill, and it was straight up, but it was clearly a path, and that's what I ended up taking because that's the direction I needed to go. And it was just the challenge I need, and I would have been exhausted had I done this effortless climb up the beautiful paved path. And I feel like that is exactly what we do all the time, especially as achievers, is we have what should be an easy run in front of us, and we literally make it difficult. We start pounding away at things when we don't need to. And I feel like that's where so much of that's where my physical pain comes from, and that it's a reminder to me that I'm pushing away when I don't need to be pushing. Like there's an easier route here. So I love what you're saying. And the other thing I like about what you're talking about with respect to yoga is that, like, how were you supposed to grow and expand when you were so tight? And it's back to this idea of elegance. And I would love for you to comment on some of the movement patterns that are just so helpful for people in terms of like reorienting to expansion as opposed to this contracted pounding state that we find ourselves in. That was a long diatribe there, but I felt like I was feeling it coming out of your effortless effort comment.
Yeah, and I think part of the process for people is what they're paying attention to. And so when people are moving, and the when I referred to a moment ago around pushing into a position, for example, and wanting a stretch sensation, for example, because there's this belief that if you have a stretch sensation, then you're doing something good for your body. And the thing is that a stretch sensation, excuse me, is merely a stretch sensation. You can move yourself into any weird, contorted position to get a stretch, and it might be doing horrible things for your body. So to utilize a stretch sensation merely as the only measure as to if you're doing something properly or good for you is not an accurate measure. And so, but people have that as a measure, or the feeling the burn being a measure, or those types of experiences. And so they'll push themselves in order to have that feeling. Whereas what I like to share with people is strength is really easy to gain. Mobility is really easy to gain. The part that is that needs to be focused on, which will make those two things easy to gain, is the coordination. And there's a whole field in physiology, which is motor control and motor coordination. And it really is the way that brain and the myofascial systems communicate. And so if you've got a lot of compensatory patterning in your body, so for example, instead of swinging your leg easily and smoothly through your pelvis when you walk, you hike your hip, as one example. Or when you bring your arms up over your head in a yoga class and you flare your ribs, which is a very common thing, then you're no longer moving your arm bone in the shoulder socket, you're flaring your ribs. And so you're moving more through your back than you are through your shoulder. And that happens a lot. Then the people do the opposite and they say, oh, oops, I shouldn't be flaring my ribs, so I better hold my ribs down. Well, now we're just compensating on top of a compensation. So we're now stacking these poor movement patterns. And when people can then start to pay attention to how they're actually moving, and are they moving the part of the body that they're meant to be moving, then all sorts of stuff begins to change, because we're eyeballing and we're paying attention to something different than what we had been. And so we get a better coordinating pattern. We get better neuro brain muscular communication. And then when we get better communication, like in all areas of our life, we get better communication, then the relationship is better. And then strength and mobility naturally happen. Release naturally happens. Letting go naturally happens. And so people can be hammering on, I've just got to get stronger, or I've just got to get more mobile, or I just need to. And I think that a lot of people aren't getting the results they want because they're focusing not on the thing they need to focus on.
Isn't that the truth of growth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And often growth when we don't have a guide.
Yeah.
I love it. I would love for you to share with us a little bit, Susi, about your day. Because we're talking about, we're talking about achievement and we're talking about mobility. And the reality is that, that's one thing if we were both like just hanging out in a yoga studio all day without a care in the world. But between us, I think we have like 5 children and businesses and all of these pieces. And we were talking about this before we got started. And I'd love for you to share how you have created a bit of balance in your day. Because I think it speaks to this idea of exactly what we're talking about.
I've been running my training company for a lot of years. So when I got pregnant, I thought a lot about how this was going to happen. So this wasn't something I was going to pack up and put on the shelf. I love my work, and I wanted to love being a mom. So for me, the two were definitely going to be in my life. And so I thought about, what makes the most sense. And my kids are sort of between 2.5 and 2 3/4. Like they're starting to round the bend towards 3 years old, and they're a set of twins. And so I thought when I was in my last 3 months of, okay, how is this really going to go? And of course, no one knows until you have them. And what I thought for my own self was, okay, I love working in the morning. I am a morning person. I've always been a morning person. When I was living in Toronto, going to school, I was a lightweight rower. So that was always 5 a.m. in the morning. So that's always been sort of my jam. And so then I sort of crossed my fingers and did a little bit of, woohoo dance moves kind of thing, and said, I really hope these kids are good with me doing my work in the morning. So what I started off with is I dialed everything way back and thought about, how do I keep the wheels on the bus to keep this thing moving forward, or at least moving. And so that's what my first thought was. And so that was my first year, was just keeping the wheels on the bus. And it dialed a whole lot back. And then the next year, I started adding a little bit more. And then now we're into the third year. And the consistent factor through all of it has been that I get up around 4:30 in the morning. And if there's something that needs to absolutely get done, I'll get it done pretty soon after that. After I do a very short meditation and yoga practice in the morning, just to sort of set myself and ground myself. And then if there's something super important that has to be done, then I'll get that done. And then my first client is at 6 a.m. And I see people at that phase in the morning online. And then I see a couple of people before 8. And then I do most of my work in the morning, and I finish up at about 1 in the afternoon. And then on Fridays, I call those my executive board days. And they're with my 2 most important members, being my 2 kids. And then we just do whatever we do. Sometimes we stay home. Sometimes we go out to an indoor playground or outdoor playground, or go for bike rides or whatever, that's a non-planned day most of the time. And that's the way the working week goes. And it's a question that I keep asking myself. And I got this from a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, a book that I found back in 2014. And when my kids were little in stroller and I was out for walks with them in their first few months of their life, I was listening to that like a lot. And I had listened to it a lot before I had them. And so the thing that I really took from that is less but better. And the second one was what is like the most important thing? What's the one thing that I really need to focus on? And there's also an elegant way of saying no. So between those few things, I really was able to carve out and build upon a good foundation over these past 3 years toward building, I would say now, a much more efficient business than I had before I had my kids. So it's been really fun. It certainly has that sort of fact of life. So we've just kind of worked with it and moved with it and then found our groove with it.
It's so great. And before we move on to anything, I would like you to share with us how we say no in an elegant way. Oh,
I've got a few.
Give us the script.
Yeah, for sure I will. And I'll also say this. Get the Essentialism book. He has a whole chapter. I think he's got 9 ways of saying no. So that's a total plug for him.
It's a great book.
And that's Greg. It's a great book.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. And so I have it on audio, and every so often it's like, I just need to listen to something. And it's one of those books that's like, that wasn't in the book the last time I listened to it. There's something always new on it. But so here's a great example. So I was recently asked by a teacher who's building out this new program to be a part of the program. And she wanted me to review the program and be available as an advisor. And she wasn't being really clear about exactly what she needed. And all I could see was this bleeding out. And really the only time that I had available to be a part of this was where I have my kid time and my family time. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. And so I said to her something like this. I said, I think I said, thank you very much for asking me. And at this time, I'm going to have to pass. And please don't take this as a vote against you. This is a vote for me and my family.
I love it.
So that was one way that I did it. Another one that I've used is a pregnant pause, where someone might ask something and then I just pause if we're face to face, and I will literally not say anything.
Yeah, that works well too.
It actually works really, really nicely. And so, then they might then maybe come up with something else, or they'll refine it, but it's because I have a meditation practice, I've got a certain longevity of stillness where I don't have to say something.
Isn't it powerful?
And so in that space, and sometimes, frankly, I'm not sure if it's a yes or a no. And so if I'm just still and I can feel into my own body of, is this even something to consider? Then at least then sometimes the pause is for myself, but then sometimes I do use it very strategically. And then they'll tend to speak first.
Yeah. You know what what I really love, and what I'm hearing you say here, is you're just assertive about your needs, which is in contrast to being passive aggressive or aggressive about what you need. And again, it is like there's a maturity and an elegance to that that generally isn't offensive to people. In fact, I find when you can assertively say no, but you're gracious about it, it conjures just as much respect from the person than if you had said yes. Like, we have so many limiting beliefs around saying no. And I love the way that you phrased that.
Yes. And I think you're right. And Greg McCowan says this in his book too. He says, you will garner more respect. I think there are a lot of people who want to be able to say no, and they don't know how to say no. Mm-hmm. And when they're in the space around someone who says no well, it's a great learning experience.
Yeah. And we did a podcast. I did a solo podcast on this a few weeks ago where we were talking about this idea of simply being assertive and how powerful that is. So I'm going to make sure that we link that up in the show notes here as well, because it is one of those skills in life that if you can master, it's going to open up so many doors to you. Susi, I want to talk a little bit about your methodology. I want to get a sense of that, because I know we have a lot of people listening who are deeply interested in yoga, practice yoga regularly, but are like, hey, I'm also burnt out. Like, what's going wrong? And maybe one of those things I see at least frequently in my practice, and I am by no means a yogi master. I have a deep respect for the practice, but it's certainly not my area of expertise. But I find round one of attempting yoga in my burnt out crowd is they go, you know what? I took your advice. I did yoga. I do hot yoga 7 days a week. And I'm still burnt out. What's going on? So I'd love for you to speak to your methodology a little bit, because I think there's like type A ways of doing yoga that doesn't always serve people. And I suspect you're not going after that.
No. And I think one of the difficulties with yoga is that there tends to be a belief that yoga can help everything. And while I do think yoga can help everything, it's not all at the same time. And it's also how the yoga is practiced. And so a lot of yoga is focused in on poses and just doing the poses, and that, and not necessarily being really aware of your body in the poses. It's more about pushing through something or getting something. So you're superimposing what you maybe have done when you were a runner into the yoga practice. And so that can get a little tricky. So for me, I tend to focus more on how you're moving as opposed to the feeling of a burn or the feeling of a stretch, and bringing in your awareness to your state of mind, your state of being, and teaching you the tools to pay attention. Because when you're in a place of burnout, I like to draw a diagram. So follow along with me in your visual mind of a cliff. And there's a roadway along the cliff, and you're this little car driving along this roadway along this cliff. And then you pass all these exits, and all these exits have these little yellow yield signs, but you miss them because they're faint and you're just kind of entranced by the environment. And then you get to the edge, and then you start seeing red stop signs and red lights and warning signs that the edge of the cliff is coming. But you still are missing them. And then you drive over the cliff and then into the water. And so by the time you're over the cliff and into the water, you're well into a burnout state. And so my job is to help kind of winch you back up onto the side of the cliff. And so in that process, I'm helping you recognize what your edge actually is and what your bandwidth is because a lot of people who are driven and quite ambitious, and you've used the word achiever, there's a tremendous capacity. But as they keep doing what they're doing, they're losing the ability to express that capacity. And their bandwidth, by the time you're in a burnout state, or you're on your way to a burnout state, your bandwidth is getting smaller and smaller. So there's a distinction between your bandwidth and your capacity.
It's so great. I'm putting a pregnant pause in there. Bandwidth and capacity. Like I really just want people to hear that because I feel like that reorients so many people, and I completely interrupted your flow, but it was so brilliant.
Yeah, no problem. So there's this idea of like, what is your true bandwidth? And then when I'm showing them how they actually move, a lot of them move way smaller than they think. And then they have this moment of like, holy blank. And it's usually a very strong cuss word, like, you have got to be kidding me. That's as much as my movement is. And I'm like, that's what your movement is. Well, then how the hell am I ever going to get to where I want to go? And I'm like, okay, hold on a sec. You are perceiving a gap between where you actually are, your bandwidth, and where you think you should be, which is where you think and know your capacity is. And you're seeing this big gap. And that's all in your mind. So the perception is way bigger than what actually is because I can help you shift up your how you move quite quickly if you honor your bandwidth. But you've got to honor where you are. If you just keep kind of pushing past what you actually have available, you will consistently remain where you are. And so you have to honor what's actually real. And then the example I like to use is when people go into debt. So say they overspend on their credit card. It's Christmas time and it's been an oops, and you go over and you overspend on your credit card. Well, if you keep doing that, if you do that once or twice, no big deal, right? You get back on, you tighten up the belt a little bit and you rein it in a bit, and then you get back on track. But if people keep doing it, then they get themselves into some trouble. And then we might, I certainly know a few people who are like this, that they've used their home line of credit to pay off their credit card. And so then they see their credit cards clear and they're like, okay, let's go spend. But they've forgotten that there's this home line of credit that they still are, getting more and more in debt. So then they keep being in a depleted state. So if you keep doing that, then you're going to stay where you are. And so if you just kind of focus in on working within what your energetic bandwidth is now, you're going to grow that to meet your capacity. And I know it sounds kind of weird. This is what I say to them. I say, I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's the way it works. And so it happens also very, 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 very quickly. And you just have to appreciate where your actual bandwidth is, and then that bandwidth will then grow. And then they'll say to me, so then do I need to work to my edge? And then I'll say, well, what you perceive your edge to be is beyond your bandwidth. And so if you go as far as your edge, like into that stretch sensation, push sensation, and your kind of breathing heavy sensation, you're well past where you are. Like later on, when you're at your capacity, when you're working with your capacity, then we can start playing with that. But right now, where you're at, you just got to work with where you're at. And what you need to pay attention to, what you need to become aware of, is how your body moves, and to make sure you move in a range that doesn't increase your symptoms. And so if you do that, then you're going to have more and more capacity. You'll have more bandwidth, and you'll be able to and you'll expand into your capacity. And so I use the analogy of a traffic light, and I was making mention of that when they were on the cliff. But when the persons come to me, they're very much in red light. And so my job is to help them come to yellow. And so the yellow is them recognizing and realizing how their body actually moves. And so where they grip and where they hold and where they might be going past really the movement that they should. And they start to realize all these other things and these nuances. And it's something they haven't typically paid attention to, which is not uncommon, because where the pain is not normally the problem. Where the pain is an expression of the problem, and the actual problem lies under our level of awareness. And so if I can draw the awareness to where the actual problem is, and they can start to improve the actual problem, then they'll get better a whole lot faster. And then that bandwidth starts to grow, and they have a lot more energy and vitality. And sometimes they're like, why do I feel so good? I'm not doing anything. I'm like, that's the point. The point is you don't have to do a whole lot. Like it's a whole, like it's getting better. This is going to sound a little crazy, but getting better and recovering is actually a lot simpler than people make it out to be. And that's what's so hard about it, is actually a whole lot simpler, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Well, and I think sometimes people think it's going to slow them down if they take a break to recover. And what I actually find is you just take the break to recover and everything starts to accelerate and you feel good while you're doing it.
Yes, and that's true. You have to slow down to go fast, for one. And I totally appreciate this idea of slowing down and freaking out. I've worked with a lot of people who are like, but if I slow down, I'm never going to pick up again. Or if I stop, I'm never going to pick up again. And I say, I know, I get that. I totally get that. So this is why we're going to help you understand and recognize the way that you move, because right now you're being inefficient in the movement patterns and in your breathing patterns. And so it makes sense that it's going to feel that way. And so you just need to get your parts working better again. And then you'll pick up really. The body is remarkable. Like that's the piece
Isn't
I think
it? Yes.
a lot of people forget, right? Like a lot of people will come in and say to me that they're to be frank, they're pissed off at their body because their body's not keeping up and it's breaking down. And I completely get it. And I don't make them wrong for thinking that, because that is a very, very true experience. And then what I do say to them is I say, you know what, like, your mind is so strong and you've got huge ambitions, and it's beautiful how your body has kept up with how much you've wanted to do. The trouble that all of us as human beings face is that while our mind just goes and 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 goes until the last nail's in the coffin, basically, the body doesn't. The body will break down, but it will keep up. It will do its darndest, if I can say it that way, to keep up with all that we want to do, but it's not a renewable resource. And so if we compensate on top of compensating, on top of compensating, on top of compensating, at some point, there's only so much more we can compensate. It will break down. But it's been doing all this work in the meantime to try and keep up with everything that you've been wanting. And we just need to help it out and reboot it and give it a break and pat it on its back and just be like, thank you for keeping up. Thank you for keeping up.
Yeah. And
thank you for telling me
yes.
me that you've got no more power left.
Yeah. It's super smart, right? Like the body won't speak to you, but it has a dashboard and you have to listen to that dashboard, because if you just put tape over the oil light, you can't be surprised when you run out of oil. And we all know, regardless of our car acumen, that running out of oil is a really bad thing to do. Hey, you. If you're a colleague, if you're a practitioner, if you are seeing patients, if you are looking to up-level your impact in the health and wellness space, I wanted to let you know that we are hosting one heck of an amazing event taking place on November 21, 22, 23 in Toronto. Impact Lives is our signature flagship event that takes place on an annual basis, and it is a coming together of some of the most impactful people in the health and wellness industry. Over the 3 days, we are unpacking the mindset that has been holding you back from achieving the impact you have always dreamed of. We are spending a day looking at new tactics and techniques, some of the things that people are using in a cutting edge capacity to take their impact and their practice to the next level. And if you want to join us for our VIP bonus day, we are going deep in a workshop setting, 6 different workshops to up-level your mindset, your business, and your impact. Impact Lives is an incredible experience. And our promise to you this year is that when you walk through the door, you will not be capable of leaving as the same person you were when you arrived. If you want to learn more about how you can participate in Impact Lives, check us out online, www.impactlivesevent.com. reallylevel.com. I cannot wait to see you there. Susi, I feel like this is such a perfect place to transition the interview. And just like we have in our business KPIs or key performance indicators, I believe we also have them in our lives. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you if you're ready to indulge me.
Sure.
All right. First question for you. Who is inspiring you right now?
My kids.
Love it. Remind us how old they are.
They're turning the bend on 3, and they're just amazing little human beings. And they're just the way they pick stuff up and the way they honor their own emotions, the way they are who they are in the moment that then they're in their moment. They're amazing.
I love that. Fiction or nonfiction? What are you reading right now?
I'm reading the craziest fiction book called Power. And it's about women who have unleashed this electrical power in their bodies. It's really crazy.
Oh, that sounds really cool. I'm not a huge fiction reader, but I'm slightly intrigued by that. I'm going to look into it. What is one thing you are most consistent with respect to your health?
Meditation and yoga.
What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
Badass about me.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's a lot.
Oh, goodness me. God, it's and I'm in the middle of it right now, which is probably why I wasn't thinking it, is that every Christmas season, we make about 3,000 pieces of truffle, and chocolate truffle, peanut butter truffle, white chocolate truffle, bark, turtles, like a lot of turtles. And we give them to everybody in our life, and they are just amazing. Anyway, so it's our thing.
That's lovely. I really like that.
Yeah.
And maybe this lends itself really well to this question, but what do you do for fun or play besides making copious amounts of chocolate?
This season is definitely the chocolate season. Right now in my life right now, it really is it's helping my kids with their somersaults and doing airplanes and being the horsey and tickling and just being in their space.
It's great. And there's actually nothing more freeing than that. And you just have to enjoy it while you're at it. Right? Like you just have to do it. And I'm going to just throw on one more badass thing. You have twins and you've written like 10 books and you're running this empire and you are finding balance. And that is totally badass in my books. Just so you've got that for your next interview. Last question for you, Susi. Entrepreneurism. Are we born this way or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's in you. You might not know it's actually in you. And so then it's developed. And so I think you can grow it for sure. But I think there's some people who are naturally inclined toward supporting the entrepreneur as a sort of an employee versus being the entrepreneur. So I think it's a case of both and.
Fair enough. Susi, you are up to amazing things. You've got a wicked following and awesome content on Instagram. You've got amazing training programs. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you're up to?
It's definitely on Instagram and on Facebook. Its Facebook handle is susi.hately.fs. Right to my website at functionalsynergy.com. Happy to have a chat with anybody who's interested in what I'm up to and helping them either with their own body and minds or to train them. I'm happy to help out.
I love this. We're going to hook everybody up in the show notes, and I'm going to leave everyone with a challenge this week. And that is, I want you guys to get into your bodies. I want you to really feel what is going on and then listen to it. Take some action on that because it's so difficult to expand as an entrepreneur if we are caught up and closed off from this whole powerful message that is our health and our body. Susi, thank you so much for being here and for having this conversation. I think it's so important.
Super. Thank you.
If you loved today's episode as much as I did, and I clearly did, I would love to hear from you over on Apple Podcasts. If you could leave us a review and some feedback, it helps us reach more people. And we'd love to carry on this conversation. I'd love to hear how you are integrating movement and how you are expanding your mission in this world. There's a whole bunch of us who share this philosophy, and we hang out on Facebook in our group. It is called the Anthropology Collective, and this is a community, this is a tribe of women who are looking to contribute in massive ways and take care of themselves along the way. We are your people. We would love to hear from you, and that is where we're going to be carrying on the conversation that we started with Susi today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me this week. I can't wait to do this again with you next Tuesday, and until then, go build something